Hola, buenas tardes a todos a este ciclo de conferencias, seminarios sobre visualización de datos. I will switch into English. Good evening to you all. Thank you for coming to this seminar on data visualization. We had organized together between CIMAT and INEGI. Here I leave the floor to Claudia Esteves from CIMAT, so she can introduce Professor Elaine Harrison.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So we are very happy to have today Elaine Harrison. I will give you a little bit of his CV accomplishments. So Elaine Harrison is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Prior to joining WPI, Elaine was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Computer Science at Tufts University. He obtained his bachelor and PhD degrees in computer science from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He has served as general chair for the IEEE Visualization and Cybersecurity Symposium, held in conjunction with the IEEE Vis conference. And he now directs the VIEW group at the WPI, where he and his students leverage computational methods to understand and shape how people interpret, use, and create data visualizations and visual analytics tools. We are very happy to welcome you now virtually. We hope that someday we can welcome you in person. Okay. And thanks a lot for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Johan. So I'm Elaine Harrison. It's really great to be here. Like I said, I was a professor here at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. That's in Massachusetts. So I was a postdoc at Tufts, not far down the road. I interviewed all throughout the country, and I'm not actually from Massachusetts originally, and somehow I ended up here again. I suppose it's a nice place. It is nice right now, the fall season, one time a year that's good before all the snow hits us. So it's great to be here. I want to start actually not with the talk, but to extend an invitation to you. So I do have screen sharing capabilities, so I'll do this. Viz is a conference, the main conference in visualization, and it happens to be next week. So we're gearing up for Viz right now. So this is the Viz website, IEEEviz.org. The reason why I wouldn't normally do this, but if I click on register, it's like the fees are pretty low this year, and I think there's even some like inclusivity provisions for folks who are international. So you might check it out. It would be, usually it's like several $1,000s to attend these conferences, but it's going to be an all virtual program next week. So if you do go, feel free to say hi. I'll be there part of the time. I'm also teaching, so I'll be doing that part of the time as well. But let's jump over into slides, because that's why we're all here. I wanted to talk about some visualization research that our lab, mostly students and me, my proxy, have been working on for the past few years, quantifying the individual experience of visualizations. And I'll get into what that means. It's meant to be a title that you might not get at first glance, but I'll tell you why I think it's important to look at the individual experience of visualizations. A little bit extra background here. So Associate Professor in Computer Science, also affiliated in data science, interactive media and game development, bioinformatics and computational biology. This is just the thing that happens if you become faculty at Worcester Polytech. We have a lot of programs, interdisciplinary programs. And I do work in information visualization, visual analytics, and human-computer interaction. Those are the conferences that I mainly publish in. So we might argue that we're in a golden age of data visualization. Hopefully you might agree. So looking at the left here, we have an interactive visualization system. It's got machine learning built in, and these are crafted by researchers and industry professionals who are kind of have these models in the loop with humans, and visualization is a part of it. It's a really exciting time to be working in an area like that. But not only that, so this is visualization for analysis. We also, we even have visualization for fun now. So if you're familiar with Wes Anderson movies, these beautiful cinematic movies, This is a fun visualization that actually uses some machine learning output to look at scenes in Wes Anderson movies. And here we can see dark scenes and scenes with, that are desaturated. And some of these relate to maps and things that are going on across multiple movies. It's really a fascinating look and a fun look at some really interesting data. Down at the bottom, we have this drawing data set of people drawing dogs and cats. Just another example of how the visualization community has grown. We have not only analysis, we also have fun. And, naturally, we're going to have more and more data journalism come of this too. I think this is probably the biggest change in the past decade. So I've been working in visualization since about 2007. In the just past 2010, the explosion of visualization on the web, the accessibility of tools to journalists has really changed the landscape. So here is just, I think this is a Washington Post article about a possible, flood inundation map as a, hurricane is hitting the coast. So, we might feel that we're in a golden age of data visualization until reality sets in. So obviously, one of the reasons why I'm not there in person is we have this pandemic going on. And what we're looking at here are recent COVID-19 deaths. So deaths per 100,000 residents in the US since June 16th. And this tells a story, and possibly a story of the power and the promise of visualization, but failed. So we saw this pandemic coming. We're doing this really interesting thing, especially, those of us in math and sciences, we're kind of calibrating our uncertainty collectively around March 2020. Like we were like, oh, is it going to be a pandemic? How bad is it going to be? Oh, it could kill hundreds of thousands of people. Like this all happened for us, the math science folks pretty readily, but it didn't spread equitably. And now I think we're dealing with a bit of the fallout there. So, there's some power to being able to understand data, to be able to understand models that we carry with us in our daily lives. So it's not just, dealing with vaccines that we have this power. It's making a home purchase, or it's starting a business. We could definitely handle the books and the uncertainty and the data-driven reasoning that goes along with that. So this is a thing that I'm very interested in, kind of studying. I think visualizations themselves are very interesting, but even more interesting sometimes are the people that are viewing them and what they're getting out of them. So I'd like to share a bit of a research agenda kind of centered around that. So, here's another example of our calibration whenever this was the number of days since the 100th case. We're again looking at some COVID statistics here. Really interesting to see the log scale visualizations here. These are all things that we make sense of. So, what do you get from this chart? What experiences are you drawing on from moment to make sense of this chart? I'll actually pause for a second so you can make sense of it. How does your attention shift between the tasks? Are you checking out the axes here and then checking out some of the data? Are you making a comparison between countries? Are you looking for a country, that's of significance to you? Maybe you have relatives in Japan or Germany or South Korea. How quickly and confidently do you do all of this? So, this was a chart that was made March 12th, right? This was, I think, maybe even before the bans on travel, or right around that time from the US. And that's where it really set in here. Is like, oh, we can't fly anymore. We should take this thing seriously. But we can change these questions just slightly. What would a person who left high school in the 70s get from this chart? So a person, maybe born around 1960, they went to high school in the 70s, and that's the extent of their education. Everything else they got was on the job or on their own. What experiences might they draw on? How, where do they see log scales? Maybe they don't, and maybe this chart is nonsense to them because of it. How might their attention shift when reading this visualization? So you as an expert, do you look at a chart differently than someone who is a novice, who doesn't have training with kind of making sense of this sort of data and the calibration and prediction? what if, in the US here, days since 100th case, so what were we going to look like, a little bit later on? Now, how quickly and confidently will they do all of this? So speed and confidence in doing this also matter. So why do individual experiences matter? Well, I've highlighted where we're going, but first, a few preliminaries. Is our skill in performing basic chart reading and interaction tasks related to our ability to extract value from a given visualization? So I kind of spelled this out as a sort of like testable thing that we can explore and work on. To what extent do we differ in our ability to analyze and interact with visualizations we encounter in day-to-day life? So that's another driving question. And then, finally, how might we shape the experience of visualizations to better empower individuals to extract value from data visualization? This is actually where I want to start, because when I, kind of started this sort of analyzing news visualizations, it came sort of in the middle around 2014, 2015, sort of in the, in this golden age where the news was putting out interactive visualizations week by week. And I actually started with these kind of, tiny life improvements. So our research lab put these together. So, okay, so let me back up. So let's revisit first how we derive data visualization guidelines in the first place. So here we're looking at, this is actually taken out of the textbook. So Tamara Munster's Visualization Analysis and Design. So it's a common text that you would use in an undergraduate or graduate visualization course these days. And what we're looking at here is, the most effective visual channels as determined by empirical studies and the least effective ones. So volume we know is difficult because of, the problems with occlusion. If you had to estimate how many of these would fit into the other, you're likely to, either under or overestimate that, just because it's very difficult to sort of mentally manipulate volumes. Similarly, area here is better than volume, but it's not quite as good as some of these other channels that we have available to us. So things like length, and then these weird ones, position along a common scale and position along an unaligned scale. These are the charts that you're most familiar with. So there's a reason why bar charts are used so often. It's because they're positioned along a common scale and they're using length. So they're using these, two together, length on a common scale. Position on an unaligned scale would be something like a stacked bar chart. So you have length, but they're stacked on top of each other. So you don't have that common baseline to look at them. Another position along a common scale would be a scatter plot. Now, we derive these scales, these rankings of effectiveness by basically putting together, mashing together a lot of empirical studies. And one of these studies comes from 1984, and it asked the same question over and over again. Which of the two is larger? Okay, so of the two marked, which of the two is larger? This is a quite easy problem. And then what percentage is the smaller of the larger? So what percentage is this slice of this? So maybe 50%, and this right here, maybe also 50%. You might say 40%, who knows? But this study, run by Cleveland McGill in 1984, they obtained these results for position, which were bar charts, versus angle, which were pie charts. And we can see with this log-base 2 error that we're actually performing a lot better with the bar charts, so lower error is better than we are with the pie charts here. And this was exciting because now we have empirical evidence that one chart type is better than another, and this spawned many studies to follow. So we have another reproduced chart from a 2010 paper. Here, Cleveland McGill's results, the originals at the top, and down here we have replicated results on crowdsourcing platforms. If anyone's familiar with Amazon's Mechanical Turk, that's what this particular study was run on. They also added other visualizations here that weren't even around when Cleveland McGill was run in the first place, like T9. This tree map wasn't even invented in 1984. It didn't exist then. But so it's exciting that you can use the same sort of methodology to study different chart types. So we've been doing this. So it's not just this replication. I can point to at least 4 or 5 other replications and slight modifications of these empirical visualization studies. It's led to a wealth of knowledge. It's now reflected in our textbooks. and just all over the place. Now, I like using visualizations to study people. So I want to give you a task. We'll see if this works on Zoom. And the task is the following. I'm going to show you two scatter plots, and I want to ask you which one is more correlated. So let's get ready for audience participation. All right, which of these two is more correlated? I'll tell you it's not a trick question. So does anyone say left? All right, a lot of folks saying left. Cool, +1. Some folks saying right. So it's not a trick question this time. Oh, look at that. Very consistent on the left. Nicely done. Nicely done. So we have here, correct. So we have here a correlation of 1 and a correlation of 0.95. Now, I have another one for you. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to say like new answers start here. All right. Which one is more correlated, left or right? It's not a trick question. They're not the same. One is more correlated than the other. How many say right? How many say left? Oh, I love seeing that mix. Nicely done, team left. Team left, you are a super visualization seer, or maybe you just guessed correctly. There is a random chance that you get this right. But I want to make a point here. So you just did that problem, and thank you all for participating. It's okay if you got it wrong. We have scientific evidence to tell you that this is a very hard problem and that you might not even be able to consistently get it correct. But these have the same difference between them. So we have 1.0 and 0.95 and 0.35 and 0.3. So the difference of 0.05 is the same in each of them, but one is harder than another. Why is that? So this was a fun paper that we put together, and credit where credit is due. There's another researcher that sort of discovered this effect in scatter plots. All I'm going to talk about here is how we expanded it. So if you want the original, go to Ron Rensink, a brilliant researcher. Here's my remix of that, where we expand this past scatter plots to a bunch of different chart types and show why that can be valuable. So this has to do with Weber's law. So Weber's law is a model for low-level perceptual discrimination. Weber's law is old. It dates back to the 1800s. So doing psych studies way back then. Things like sound pitch, taste of saltiness can follow a Weber fraction. Our perception of weight. Actually, I have a good one for weight. So if you blindfold yourself and you're holding out a 35-pound weight, so something very heavy. I don't have anything very heavy, so I'll use my teapot. So say this weighs 35 pounds. I'm blindfolded and you place a paper clip on it, so I can't see that you did it. I might not notice that weight difference. However, if I'm holding nothing in my hands and you place the paper clip there, I will reliably notice it. And what the Weber fraction will do, so this constant K, this slope, is going to tell you basically, it's going to give you a model. So I could basically say like, okay, how much weight would I need to add so that a person reliably can discriminate between the sensation that I'm giving them. And it's the same thing for things like brightness, line length. But what's really odd here and exciting for visualization is that it applies for the perception of correlation. So we found this effect for Weber's law. So it was found in scatter plots. And then we want to say, okay, what if I could just run that study that I just ran on you all? Thanks for being good participants. What if I could just do that across several different chart types and different correlation values? So I look at negative correlation in this study, positive correlation, not just scatter plots, but also here parallel coordinates plots. So this if you've never seen a parallel coordinates plot, they're quite interesting. You take this axis and you bring it up here, and then you draw lines between the observations. It's really good for multidimensional data. So the parallel coordinates plot, very nice visualization technique. We chose these, the stacked area, stacked line, and stacked bar, because they were one click away in Excel. We loaded some, 2 variable data, and we looked at what Excel gave us, and it was these 3 chart types. So we replicated them. Then we had the line chart, also in Excel. We did test for a possible effect of ordering. If we order the values, does that potentially lead to better performance in this correlation discrimination task? And then to round things out, and that's a joke, usually people laugh here, but it's silent. We have the donut chart and then the radar chart. So now these charts, you might look at these and be like, why would I ever use that for analyzing correlation? And you might not, but what we were doing here is running a study. So we wanted to pit all of these visualizations against each other and see if we can perform that same sort of study that I just gave you, which one is more correlated. You just do that again and again and again. And we did that a lot using crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing is a wonderful tool. And what you're looking at here is about 200,000 individual judgments. So I think it was around 1,200, 1,500 people that we recruited for this. And we had them do many judgments apiece. And we ended up with a data set of about a size of 200,000. And you'll see here the scatter plot positive, that's a nice tight line, scatter plot negative. You can see some odd shapes here. You can see some that broke our experiment completely. I can annotate. I'm pretty good at that in Zoom. So, like for instance here, stack bar positive just broke our experiment. So that was, still interesting to find. But stack bar negative actually, had some signal there. So what we ended up doing after this is we, fit our models. So we ended up fitting lines to all the data that you just saw here. I just simplified it. And some of them aren't shown there. For instance, the ones that broke the experiment, stack bar positive, you won't find that represented here. But what you'll see is, more precise things like the scatter plot. So both blue lines are down here at the bottom. Parallel coordinates actually was here as well. And what we end up seeing is, okay, for every chart type tested, at least one of the conditions, negative or positive, the perception of correlation in every chart that we tested was successfully modeled using Weber's law. There was a Weber fraction, there was a reasonable fit for each chart type. And what's exciting about this is that we can now compare a scatter plot to a donut chart using the same modeling procedure. So, rather than just having comparative experiments again and again and again, we can just fit these models for people, and then we can compare the models themselves. So it saves us a lot of time overall. It's kind of, nice to have this sort of model-driven result to be able to talk about the effectiveness of visualizations. So that's where we ended up. Any questions at this stage? Because I'm going to flip it on you in a second. All right, we're good to keep going. Good. Okay, so the perception of correlation in every tested chart was successfully modeled using Weber's law. However, I wanted to add that however in there. It turned out that a really smart person, Matthew Kay and Jeffrey Hare, so Matt Kay, basically I put my data online, and Matt Kay was like, as someone who knows something about statistics, I could model this better. So Matt went back and took our data and reanalyzed it and did this wonderful Bayesian analysis where you could basically add uncertainty to each of these lines that we had. So instead of having a strict ranking, we can basically say we've got high precision visualizations, medium precision, and low precision. But there was something very interesting in his paper, and we ended up, just talking about this. We include a random intercept by estimating an offset from the intercept for each participant K. So when I saw that he came up with this from a statistics perspective, so I went to him and asked, like, hey, could we potentially do that, but just model the performance of each person individually across a range of chart types? And he said, I couldn't see why not. So we ended up, kind of putting these ideas together, writing a grant to the National Science Foundation in the US, and that was funded. So now I want to show you the stuff that's technically in submission. So the question here for the grant is, can we flip visualization experiments to study people instead of visualization techniques? So everything I've been talking about so far, all these studies in visualization, is about studying, you know, is a bar chart better than a pie chart? Is that better than a stack bar chart? Is it better than a tree map? Is it better than a bubble chart? All these different viz techniques, which we've been very good at the viz community. We've made tons of techniques over the years, and we need to evaluate the differences between them. But what this modeling technique kind of raises as a possibility, we might flip that around and say, okay, we know what viz techniques are common. We want to measure how good are people at basically reading these visualization techniques. So we want sort of a low-level measure of visualization literacy. So what we're doing now, so this work is in submission, we call it Revisiting Graphical Perception to Model Individual Differences in Visualization Performance. So basically, these crowdsourced results are made from getting a bunch of people who, you know, read a bunch of charts, and then we just smush all of their data together inside of a confidence interval. And then we might infer a ranking to say that, you know, this bar chart is better than a, you know, stack bar chart is better than a pie chart. And we might actually publish that ranking to, you know, in a textbook or a popular visualization book. And then it gets disseminated to practitioners like data journalists or people working at the Centers for Disease Control. And they're going to say, like, okay, we need to use this type first, and then this type, and then that type, or at least it factors into their decisions that way. What we wanted to do in this study is to see if these rankings actually hold for everyone. Or is there, you know, to what extent do people vary in their ability to read these and perform these basic chart types? So here's the study design. It, you know, it doesn't really matter, just to show you that we did design a study. Basically, we had 4 chart types. This is the most important part: the bar chart, the bubble chart, the pie chart, and the stack bar chart. So we took a subset. We actually did 15 repetitions of these because we wanted to be sure about what we found. And we ended up with about 120 participants. So 1,200 trials. I mean, thank goodness for the good crowd workers online. They sat through 1,200 trials of looking at charts and answering them. And some of them performed really nicely. So we made a chart like what you saw before. So up at the top here, this is Cleveland McGill. If you tilt your head, you can see that. Here's Heron Bostock, that 2010 paper. And then we have this work. So this work largely in agreement if we analyze it the exact same way. So our data is at least in agreement with what we saw before. But then we went through the procedure here of actually developing a better statistical model for the responses that we got from participants, for the error distributions that we got from participants, that included these individual differences, random intercepts for people. So random intercepts and slopes, rather. So what we end up, you know, rather than just having an analysis that looks like this, what we can do now, we can fit models for each individual person, and we can plot their predicted performance across each chart type. So what we're seeing here is sort of a remake of this, but each line here represents the, you know, the fit model for each participant and the predicted performance across each of them. And what we find are some interesting patterns. So you can see this highlighted one, this one in pink. You know, they're pretty good on the bar chart. They're not too good on the pie chart compared to everyone else. They are absolutely abysmal on the stacked bar chart. And then they're actually better than average on the bubble chart here. So finding this, you know, this might tell us something. Oh, is this person just misunderstanding the stacked bar chart? Could we use these model-driven, basically data-driven models to guide how we interact with people, how we give feedback to people? So let's dive into this a little bit more here. So here we've highlighted from that same chart a couple of people, just to show that these patterns, you know, it's not just a couple of outliers that we're finding. The reason why we did this modeling is so we can actually sort of mine it and dig in a lot more deeply. So on the far left side here, we wanted to find a super performer. So it's those of you that got both of the questions right earlier. If I were to put you through this experiment, maybe you'd be on the far left side over here. you want to try it, let me know. We need participants who are good at reading charts to sort of be our baseline. So this person is better than average at bar charts, way better than average at pie charts, like almost the best performer out of the 120 people that we modeled here. Also the best performer at stacked bar charts. I wonder if they cheated. And then very good with bubble charts. So across the board, just absolutely excellent at these tasks. So I want to know more about this person. And are there others like this person? And then we have somebody that's kind of in the middle, but then deviates in meaningful ways. So much better than average on the stacked bar chart, and actually better with the stacked bar chart than a pie chart. But then, not so good with the bubble chart. So we're finding these, it's not just that everyone has this proclivity to being bad with the stacked bar chart. It depends on the chart type. And this is exciting for a lot of reasons. People who perform very poorly on stacked bar or poorly on bubbles, we might be able to recast these decades of visualization studies as tools for assessing individual performance. And not only that, but what we'd like to do beyond this is we might want to look at, not only ways of measuring visualization literacy, but also ways of improving visualization literacy by using all of these, well thought out studies that we have, dozens of them. If we can recast them, add the statistical machinery, add the sort of thinking about how people might vary in their ability to perform these tasks. And we've got sort of an exciting baseline, a foundation, if you will, for how to approach visualization literacy from the bottom up. All right, let me pause there, grab a drink. Any questions at this stage? Otherwise, we're gonna kind of shift gears and start talking about interactive visualization.
I just wanted to know if there is a certain profile for the participants, or are there, for example, students from CS, they have some experience reading charts, or it can be random?
Yeah. So this is supposedly random. We actually conducted this not through Mechanical Turk, but through prolific.co, which is a new crowdsourcing platform. If you're interested in crowdsourcing, I encourage you to check it out. It's better than MTurk for a lot of reasons. I don't know if we collected demographics on this, but in the study that we're running, we're about to gear up right now. We are explicitly collecting not only demographics, but we're also collecting other measures like a numeracy test. So a numeracy test that you would give, for instance, an undergrad, in computer science, and expect them to score maybe not at the top range, but in the mid range. So we're going to have a numeracy test, spatial ability test, and we're going to look at all of these things more explicitly. So the subgroup analysis, yeah. And Andrea Fernandez, I see that. Do you have any more info on the individual participants? Nothing besides if they gave us something at the end of it. But I like where that's going. I've been interested in what is it about these participants that would lead to this, and that would be a great follow-up study to run. And then it becomes like, how do you run the statistical models to actually do those divisions? Maybe based on a comment or based on an education level, something like that. That would be very interesting for the Viz community to tackle. All right. Good. So you're thinking right in line with what we're trying to do in the future here. So we already went through this slide, but where we're going now is this thing at the bottom. So how might we shape the experience of visualizations to better empower individuals to extract value from our visualizations? And we basically sort of touched on some of these questions up here. These are ones that are going to drive some of the work our group does in the future. So I want to talk about visualizations on the web. So I realize that a lot of us make visualizations like the ones that we just saw, these static, basic visualizations. I find those endlessly interesting, and I run studies about them all the time. But it was undeniable in the past decade, the rise of visualizations on the web. So, the increased access to data has led to data journalism and interactive visualization tools. And not only that, but, this is more accessible to general audiences. So you have, news organizations, for instance, in the US, like the New York Times, they have an entire graphics team now of incredibly skilled people making incredibly interesting visualizations. And general audiences might explore these visualizations through interactions. Now, there's a problem. I mentioned the New York Times because Archie C., the graphics editor for the New York Times, there's this quote that went out, and I don't have it pinned down exactly, but it basically said only 10 to 15% of the people who visit an interactive visualization actually interact with it. So that's pretty bad. Out of 1,000 people, only 10% of that, only 100 people are actually going to interact, and these get engagements on the scales of like 100,000. So you are just basically wasting a lot of time if people actually aren't interacting with these visualizations that you have an entire team to work on, and they spend all this time and effort to make these wonderful interactive visualizations. So you'll actually see this fact reflected in data journalism today. So around, maybe 2012 to 2016, 2018 or so, there were a lot of interactive visualizations. Week by week, you could see new things, from a group of people, but that has changed. Now you see a lot more static visualization. If you go to the New York Times, you have these sort of like minimally interactive visualizations related to COVID, which is a shame. As a Viz researcher, I tend to care about interaction. So while this quote was going on, and of course I wouldn't be able to do this research fast enough to keep up with the changing trends in media, but we started on this sort of exploration of how can we support visualization better, and we drew some inspiration from some kind of obvious places. So one thing that we noticed is when we explore media online, when we explore things online or even in games, we often have some indication of where we've been and where we haven't been yet. So an easy one is purple links. So it's super obvious, but a link is purple if you visited it. And if you go to a web page that you've been to before, like this Craigslist listing here, like I've clicked on these, but I haven't clicked on those. That's useful information. But if you think about the average interactive visualization that you come across, you don't have that. It's just all the same. So all the dots are the same color. There's no indication that you've actually explored or driven beyond them. There's no visible history. Similarly with mini maps in games. So this tells me that I haven't been to certain parts of the map. So if I want to go back, I could actually explore through them and get to other parts of the map that may be interesting. Again, no equivalent for this in interactive visualizations. So if we're missing stuff that's as simple as purple links, well, we might need to rethink how we're doing interactive visualizations. So we explored this. We actually replicated a visualization here from the New York Times. This is called How the Recession Reshaped the Economy in 255 Charts. So these are 255 line charts. Each one represents a particular aspect of the industry. So engineering and drafting services, dentists, losers like convention and trade show, building inspection. So because the U.S., the 2008 recession was related to housing, we expect to see a lot of housing related, sort of declines here. And that's indeed what we're seeing. Now, the original version of this did not have this new feature that we added in the upper right here. Visited lines and charts become darker and thicker. So really all that you're getting here is this subtle visual cue of something that you've been to versus not. So it's the ones that you've been to. In this case, we did some A/B testing. We decided going darker was better than the reverse. So here, we've been to these two at least, and we've been to a couple of these in the middle. And it sounds, very basic, but we wanted to see, does this impact people's exploration patterns? Oh, we have Roberto Hernandez. Do you think the low interaction of people is because of mobile scrolling and its interactive possibilities? Do you think that mobile would be potentially a solution to this? Absolutely correct. Yes, I think even the studies that I was just showing, those we restrict them to desktop computers, but we have to move mobile. We've got to move mobile. And same thing for interactive visualizations. We don't know the design space of interactive visualizations on mobile phones. There have been some that are decent, but we really need to figure out like how deep are people willing to explore on a mobile phone, maybe the same data versus a desktop version like this. Would this even work? Because this requires a lot on space. It's a really interesting question. So mobile probably has something to do with that from the New York Times perspective, certainly. But we tested these on desktops just to sort of narrow our focus down to see if any possible effect of applying this hindsight or visual history to interactive visualizations. And we had an experiment procedure. We trained people. The important part here is we just let people explore as long as they felt, was necessary. Like, you're free to explore this visualization. We're going to pay you no matter what. We're just going to ask you about some of the insights that you found at the end. So that's what we did. And we collected a couple measurements here. So number of visits, revisits, and exploration time. So the number of unique subcharts that a person visited, the number of revisits. So maybe if there's history, they might go back and revisit it again. And then the total amount of exploration time in the charts themselves. So again, I'm just going to show you results from visualization 2 of 3, which was the 255 charts condition. Here's how it looks like the original versus the hindsight applied on the right. Again, it's a very subtle change. So if we see any difference, it's going to be interesting. And we indeed did see some differences. So here the number visited. So the average participant visited up to the same number of charts through this overlapping confidence interval and up to 16 more with hindsight. Now, because that p-value is at 0.110, we can't say anything statistically conclusive about it. But this is suggestive, and it also reflects the same pattern across the 3 different visualization types that we tested, which were all with different groups of people. So this trend probably will hold here in the 255 charts condition as well. There was a significantly more revisits, but we don't find that too interesting. Mainly, it's the number visited being increased. The fact that people spend more time with the data when you give them history is kind of interesting, and it's still something that's not widely used in interactive visualization. I think it's because it just looks a little funny. I don't know. Maybe these people who design visualization have an artistic bent, and they want it to look a certain way and always to look a certain way. But this isn't that big of a change that we're looking at here, and yet it does have a measurable impact on behavior. Not only behavior, but behavior that like financial people of these data journalists actually care about. Not only that, but we saw this sort of suggestive thing that we visited in follow-up work. Like, it appears to nudge users to visit different parts of the data. We actually tested that later on, and I think we will cover that just a bit. So hindsight, it's very simple: a direct encoding of personal interaction history. You could go way more complex with this. We actually even explored collecting and saving your history across multiple visualizations on the web. So we designed this this plugin for your browser that would sort of do this augmentation for you and help track visualizations that you visit. It was a fun time. But really, where we're getting the most bang for your buck is these simple modifications that shape exploration behavior. So, I mean, there was a time on the internet before we had purple links, and I don't really remember that time. I think I was pretty young, but now they're all blue and purple, and visited is built into our web standards. Why can't it be the same way for interactive visualization? What's the benefit? All right, brief pause, and then we're going to talk about another one here: quantifying the effects of search on user exploration. So what I'm getting at now, we're talking about interactive visualizations. If you're ever in a position to design interactive visualizations, these are simple, low barrier things that may impact how your audiences engage with the data that you present to them. So search. So search was motivated by, let's see if I've got an example here. Okay. So search here was motivated by, again, visiting a chart like the 255 charts and saying, hey, I work in computing, or I work in, design. I want to see where my industry is represented in this chart. Now, to do that before, you would have to randomly explore this visualization until you found an industry of interest to you. But, and again, a lot of these studies are just like 10 lines of code in JavaScript. We just added search. We added a search bar here, and we as you clicked on something, it highlighted the one of interest, and we wanted to see how that impacted people's search or their exploration patterns in data. So the results. So again, we did this across 3 visualizations. The 255 charts from the New York Times, board of directors, which I think was from the Wall Street Journal. And then we had a control visualization that was, much simpler, just so that we could, kind of verify that this worked even in a, non-journalistic type visualization. So those who use search and those who did not search at all. So here we find only, the average visit time per item, like if they use search at all. That's kind of interesting, but it made sense to segment this data we found through pilot studies, not based on anyone who used search or who didn't use search at all, but rather after they searched for something. So items that were found through search and items that were found outside of search. So that's a subtle distinction. It would be natural to make search available to people, but they might not use it. So that's kind of what's mixed in here. And we did find some significant effects, but really the strongest effects that we found here are if you search for something. So if you search for something, you spend a lot more time exploring it on average. So that's just an effect that, kind of washed out on average across, a lot of different participants. So this is a larger effect size. And then, if a chart is found through, or if an item is found through search, people tend to visit it for a longer time. Now, I've got a, exciting result here, and I don't have a slide for it. Oh, that's sad. So basically down here enables creative exploration of unfamiliar data. That was very interesting. We had basically an exoplanets visualization. Common people don't know much about exoplanets, but here a person found that you could start a phrase with hat, and it gives you a certain type of exoplanet. So it's like from a particular laboratory. I would have never found that on my own. But another thing that we found that's actually not reflected at all here, and I want to be careful about how I say this, people search for things that are personally relevant to them. So when we had a college's data set up, for instance, people wanted to search for a college that they went to or a college that a friend went to, and then they wanted to explore the rest of the data based on that. If you think about that, that is a subtle distinction, but it's way different than most interactive visualizations that you come across. You usually don't start with something that sort of aligns with yourself and your sort of egocentric view of the world. But with search, it becomes possible. So you can search for an industry that you're involved in or that your family's involved in, and then you can sort of contextualize that throughout the rest of the exploration that you're going to go through. So we have a question here. Andrea Fernandez, have you explored collective hindsight? Like in Kindle that you see highlights have been done by multiple people. Yeah, I was just on a holiday last week and I had my Kindle and I always notice those quotes. So collective exploration history has been explored to a small degree in 2 places. So there was this system called Many Eyes back in the day. That was basically you could post a visualization or create a visualization using the tool, and you could sort of leave comments on them and point out things of interest. It was way ahead of its time, but it was an IBM project that's now been shut down. So that could be, I think the authors of that actually published some papers related to this sort of social data phenomenon. And then on the other side, this collective exploration, I feel like the New York Times has done something related to that, where it's basically you click here and then it's reflected to everyone else. But I think that it's not explored fully. So I think you're right that there's more to be explored there. We're just trying to measure and quantify some benefits so that folks might, kind of uptake, adopt, and maybe use them more. But I hope to see it in the future. I actually just saw a Twitter thread of Viz practitioners talking about this very thing. I need to reply to them eventually. All right. So we got one more project to go through. And then, so this kind of looks at the past two studies in a different light. So, a common thread throughout these studies were collecting and analyzing how people interact with visualizations on the web. So we basically put these loggers into the visualization, we collect the data, put it in a database, analyze it. Do these metrics sufficiently capture people's interaction behavior? So what we did here, a lot of times we deal with, count of interactions, the exploration time. We wanted to see if we could go beyond it. So to motivate this, I want to give you two hypothetical users on the same visualization. So what if they interact with the same number but different elements? And what if you scale this up to hundreds and hundreds of users? Is there some sort of metric we could come up with that sort of looks at like, who is the most unique explorer out of everyone that explored this particular visualization? And then similarly in the time space, so what if they spent an equal amount of time, but they had different paces? So their rhythm of exploration was different. So for the math folks who are familiar with like signal processing, and the computer science folks who are into like natural language processing, I'm going to take some basic concepts from each of those. And really, this all credit goes to me, Feng, the PhD student who actually did this and explored other metrics that didn't work. But the goal here is we need more expressive metrics to capture what really goes on in an interactive visualization. So what we did is we looked at one measure called exploration uniqueness. So that was the goal of the measure. And what we came up with was to basically model each person's exploration as kind of like a sentence. So user one, their sentence is C, B, E, G, F. User two, F, D, A, C, G. And we can do that for all people's interactions. And then if we have this list of users, we can turn it around and basically treat it, sort of like a collection of documents. So if anyone's done term frequency, inverse document frequency, it's this simple metric that usually gives fantastic results, or at least, good results compared to having nothing. So it calculates how unique a word is in a document collection. So we want to calculate how unique a particular exploration pattern is in a collection of exploration patterns. So we take the TF-IDF equation, which is shown here, and then we call it EF-IUF. It's not, not as beautiful as TF-IDF, but E is visual element and U is user. So EF-IUF, and we just substitute the terms in the equations there. And we end up comparing 3 crowdsourced participants who visited the exact same number of elements. So from those studies that we had before, the exact same numbers. And we have a low uniqueness score. Those are people who explore the outliers, which is sort of natural. If you saw that 255 charts visualization, you'd want to explore the biggest winners and the biggest losers first. And then we find some people with much higher uniqueness. So people who just explored the data in a very unique way. Very rarely focusing on the outliers and focusing on other parts of the data, which is quite interesting. So now we've got, sort of an insight. And if you look at this collectively, like how much does this particular visualization design support diverse exploration patterns? All kinds of interesting things you can come up with from this. And let's see, I don't think that I go in depth with the pacing one, but the pacing one, just so you know, you can read the paper, it's based on the Fourier transform. And we find similar measures. I would say that these results are stronger. Analyzing anything with a time component is hard. But basically, we evaluated these alongside other existing metrics in the visualization community, things related to bias, things to the data point distribution. And we find that we end up doing pretty well overall. So here are those results. I just want to be quickly, being mindful of time. So exploration uniqueness, we put these together and we basically find that they explore the viz at a slower pace. Users who use search functionality have more diverse exploration. So it sort of recast what we found in the search study, which was a separate paper in a new light, which is really nice. And these metrics sort of stand on their own, so they could be useful kind of beyond. So to put all this together, simple interaction techniques that support interactive data exploration. One is hindsight, one is search. And then new metrics that quantify interaction behavior with data visualizations, work that's still ongoing, exploration uniqueness, and exploration pacing. So that's, sort of recaps the first half of the talk. I do want to recap the second half of the talk. And I want to ask our host, how much time do we have? I realize I wasn't good at tracking that. Oh, Claudia, you are muted.
Yes, 5 minutes more or less.
Okay, great. So I nailed it. I'm right there on time. Okay, yes. Cool. So the second recap, the first part of the talk, we were talking about, can we reshape aggregate experiments or task-based visualization studies to learn about people instead of just visualization? So interactive viz on one side, reshaping these old school studies to learn about people on the other side. This also gets into analysis and modeling challenges. So we ended up using these Bayesian models that take days and days to run. It's so intense, it's so easy to fit a line that takes seconds, but to fit a line with like different slopes and intercepts for each participant and, probability distributions on both of those, it takes a lot of time. It's a little bit of a mind bend, but if you're into that, things like STAN and BRMS, always happy to chat. And then, more broadly, the potential impact of this is, do published guidelines actually align with audiences' skill sets and abilities? If you look at these studies, Cleveland and McGill and the crowdsourced results, presumably they're of, a broad audience, but, we're definitely getting like a culture bias here. Most of these participants are going to be in the US. Most of them are going to have access to a desktop computer. What happens if we expand our definitions a bit more broadly? What do we find if we run visualization studies in like 40 different countries? That's something that I'm very much interested in exploring in the future. And then, finally, I'm also interested in, can we use experiments to train accuracy, speed, and confidence with charts? We just started a study sending some visualization studies to middle schoolers on an online platform. So we want to explore that space too. So anyway, wrap up with 2 minutes to go. Thanks. Most of the work you saw was from Nifeng. However, work, in all of this is reflected by all these colleagues here. They've done some excellent work over the years. Obviously, thanking NSF for supporting part of the work that you saw. And I'll leave it for questions, either in chat, in person, or send me an email.
I don't think the public has can access the microphone. So if you have questions, please.
So you must type.
Yes. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of technical tools, what do you use normally?
Yeah, technical tools. So Viz is now done mostly in web-based tools. So like D3JS is what we create most of these experiments in. It's what we replicate the New York Times stuff in. So we use a lot of web programming to run these experiments because we're software engineers. We like to do that. And then on the back end, we use R and tidyverse packages, BRMS, STAN for actually putting together the models.
And you construct websites for the crowd, for the responses of the crowd, so you have some specific software?
Yeah. You can use software for that because we're a computer science lab, and a lot of computer science undergrads even have experience with web programming. The way that we do it now, we just have a server where we host the HTML and JavaScript ourselves, and that gives us kind of complete control over the user experience. So from the crowdsourced platform, they click a link and go to our server. And then when they're done, it actually sends a request back to the crowdsourced platform to give them their payment. It's all set up and there are APIs for that these days. So it's a boon, and it's wonderful for research to be able to run studies in this way. In fact, I'm running an in-person on Zoom study this week, and we're up to, I think, 8 participants, and it's taken months. And versus running these online crowdsourced studies, I can get 50 people by tomorrow morning. So you're thinking about research impact, that's one way to measure.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A.
Does he have a question?
Yeah, so if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting, and well, we hope we have you back sometime in person in Guanajuato.
That would be fantastic. Thanks everyone for hanging out with some Viz research. If you end up at Viz next week, please do say hi. It's a very welcoming community. So if you're doing anything related to visualization, we have a workshop, Visualization for Social Good. We have Viz buddies for newcomers. So I'm always trying to recruit people to our nice welcoming community. So let me know if you end up there, and we'll see you online.